Greetings, fellow alchemists, and welcome to Wordplay Wizardry. In today's episode, I want to cover a topic that can trouble a lot of writers, and that is pace. Pace refers to a story's rhythm, how fast or how slow it unfolds. Basically, how often does the narrative stop and smell the roses? But what is fast? What is slow? A slow pace allows for more exposition, more description, and explanation. This is less about the story and more what is around the story. Conversely, fast pace is anything that moves the story along rapidly. Action is fast. Rattling off events is fast. And even dialogue can be fast. Dialogue is a tricky one. It can be fast or slow, but that largely depends on what is said, how it's said. But the thing about pace is it's not a matter of if it should be fast or slow. There is no one speed for literature, though I can make some generalizations, specifically regarding genre. Some genres have an implied faster pace. Some will have a slower pace. But this is all about your reader's experience with your story. For instance, let's say you want to write an action-adventure story. Lots of action, cool set pieces, you know the type. Given that scenario, when do you think is the right time to get into heavy detail about the scenery? Early on, or right before a big gunfight? For those who answered early on, more often than not, you're right. With something that often moves quickly, slowing down the narrative during or just before can be jarring and not always in a good way. Now, for something like a war story, it could be interesting. The serenity of a city or field just before the fighting happens. The slow pace of life before the intensity of battle. Action, specifically any type of fighting, is usually very fast. It needs to feel energetic. It needs to be chaotic. But let me give you an example. Now, this is not one from literature, so bear with me. It's from a film, Saving Private Ryan. The opening section, specifically. Normandy. Now, the beginning of that scene is slow, calm, waves crashing on the sand, birds calling in the distance, blockades in place, soldiers preparing for what's to come, instructions. All the while, tension is building. We know what's about to happen. We're in the calm before the storm. It's slow, and this opening is only a couple of minutes of screen time. And then the landing craft hit the sand. The ramps drop. And chaos unfolds. And not only was this historically accurate, but it also built a very interesting pace. The lead up is slow, lets the tension builds. Once people start talking, you know it's coming. The pace is increasing. And then the dam burst. Those first few bullets hit, and you know you're in for the chaos and pain of war. And the only time the pace slows down after this is when they reach the sand wall to regroup. And even then, it doesn't really slow down until they win. And no, I'm not saying spoiler for that part. The Allied forces won Normandy in 1944. But the reason that I use this example is very simple. First, it's visual, so you can see the pace. You can feel the pace. It's easier to do this with a visual medium. But second, and perhaps more importantly, in the middle of German machine gun fire raining down on American soldiers, is that really the right time to describe the beach, the bunkers, the sand, the blockades? No. And that is pacing. War is a terrible beast. It is chaotic and frenetic and unchained. War might just be the fastest pace element in all of storytelling. Conversely, look at The Fellowship of the Ring by Tolkien. The opening is slow, calm, exactly as life is in Hobbiton. It's no great city, and there's no great concerns. In fact, in the book, Gandalf's first words to Bilbo are about his garden, not exactly a sprinter's pace. And this is where nuance is important. Without time to breathe, without a drop in pace, your story may move along too quickly. At the same time, if you spend no time talking about events or things that happen or action and spend all your time describing and expositing, it'll feel too slow. You don't want that either. Do you remember the story arc curve or story cliff? Well, instead of a flat line, it should look wavy. Now, I'm not going to do you the disservice of showing you my attempts at trying to draw a wavy line going up a cliff. It might just be a line, but I am not a good enough artist for that. So just imagine. Picture ocean waves or sand dunes, rolling peaks and valleys, rising and falling. On the rise is the fast action. In the valleys is the slow action. And it's this rise and fall pattern that happens all the way up the cliff to the story's climax. Think of it this way. As the pace increases and those waves rise, they are responsible for raising the climb to the cliff ever higher, each one going just a little bit more than the last, raising just a little bit higher. Tension never fully breaks. It can ease off, but it's never light because it's always building. Now, I said the wave pattern should be how pace falls in your story. And yes, you can do that. The difference here is the distance between the peaks. Does the story need there to be more distance, more slow pace? Or does it need less distance in between and a faster pace? What about moment to moment? Perhaps some of the peaks can be further apart than others. This won't be the only time you hear me say this, but I can't tell you one way or the other. It largely depends on your story, what it needs. I can describe the final process to you, but I can't make the final call. No one but the author can do that, which is you. However, there is a tool that will help you in this regard. From time to time, and specifically when you have a complete draft, take off your author hat and put on the hat of a reader and read your story. But again, don't read it like the author. Read it like someone sent it to you. How does it read? How does it feel? Do you find yourself wanting things to move along? Or do you find you need a breath because it just never slows down? And sometimes when a story doesn't slow down and constantly keeps a fast pace, it can be hard to follow. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe if things get muddy and you can't really follow what's going on, it's just too fast. Or maybe you don't have a picture of the scene in your mind, but that's different. That's another video. But in terms of what feels right, only you or another reader can determine that. But as I said, we have some tools that will help. I noted early on that dialogue can both speed up and slow down pace. It speeds up pace when it's a conversation. When it's a monologue or one person talking, the pace starts to slow down. We listen. Things are quiet. Tension often leaves. The key to remember. But if people are going back and forth, we feel that energy. The big obvious one is description. Slows down pace, whereas action speeds up pace. We talked about that, but it's worth remembering. Another thing to remember is side stories slow down the main story. When we leave what's going on, it slows the pace down. Think about a single through line, and if you step off that path, off that line, it might keep going, even though you're not seeing it. To help control pace, one thing that you should probably avoid is large sections of description or exposition. We call these things information dumps. As you can imagine, we call it this because a large amount was simply dumped at the feet of the reader all at once. Now, some exposition is necessary, especially when context is needed. Maybe the reader needs to know something that happened previously in order for what's about to happen to make sense. Because the other thing that you don't want is readers to feel lost. This is why a lot of people will use information dumps to ensure there's no confusion. But to alleviate some of the length, maybe break it up. Have a medium-sized chunk and then smaller sections not long after. Maybe broken by a little bit of dialogue, a little bit of scene action. Just something to help keep everything moving. But once again, this is where things get a little tricky. Literature is at a disadvantage when it comes to entertainment mediums. Literature and radio. Neither use visuals, not like movies and television. So, we have to provide them. Hemingway might disagree, but minimalism is for another time. But what I mean with providing the visuals is you have to give descriptions so people's imaginations can go to work, especially if you have something specific in mind. Maybe a logo, maybe a character, maybe there's something that you want people to see just how you see it. So you have to describe it. Is clothing important? Or colors? Design? Do these things add something? Do they set the scene? Usually, yes. Usually, they make a better experience for the reader. But what did we say earlier? Description and exposition slows down pace. So you have to be aware of that and be prepared to balance the pace. Now, again, genre plays a part in this process. Something set in our world doesn't need as much description unless you're creating atmosphere or mood. Something historical will need a bit of description because things were different back then. But another place, another time, now you need description. This is one reason why science fiction and fantasy are generally accepted as being longer. They have to be. Now, for those of you who'd like to write a drama, a slower pace works here. There's a lot less action, and the tension is mostly emotional. Key there being mostly. Conversely, a comedy is often slightly faster paced than drama. Mysteries are slower. Action-adventure is faster. Thriller is a little different. Think of thriller novels, like the killer in a slasher film. They walk slow, but kill fast. The bulk of a thriller will have a slower pace because it needs time to build up all that tension. And just when you think it's over, surprise! Or you could turn the genre on its head. Any of them. But let me be clear. Some genres, like action-adventure, have a fast-paced element built right into their name. Action is fast. Slow action just sounds wrong. But if you can prove me wrong, I'd be interested to read it. Pace is not always something that you plan out. It's not something you can outline or describe like a setting. All you can do at the start is have an idea. After you choose a genre, start to have an idea about the pace. Do you want to mirror others in that genre? Do you want to switch it up? This is not something I can decide. Only you can. I can give examples, such as maybe you want to do a fantasy story, but maybe you want to push things and tell it on the faster side. Or maybe a mystery that moves along and barely gives the reader any time to analyze clues. Or a sci-fi tale that's entirely built around the slow build of tension. But what your story needs is up to you and up to it. You'll know if a section is moving too fast or too slow, especially if you read your story. Now, if you want to wait and read it all once the first draft is done, that's fine. Doing so gives you more of an opportunity to see the overall pace instead of just that of a single scene. It gives you the feel of your story. Plus, with a full draft, it gives you the opportunity to adjust. Does the early third need to slow down? Does the middle need to speed up more? Just remember, there's nothing wrong with 5 or 6 or more drafts, whatever you need to do to get it right. Not just the story itself, but the story's pace. You want the best experience you can give to your readers. You want them invested, which means you don't want them feeling like the story is leaving them in the dust because it's moving too fast. But you also don't want them ready to move on while you're still describing a tree. At the right pace, at the right moment, and it creates magic. All of this is not just about getting them on the hook with your story. It's about keeping them on the hook. But that's a conversation for next time. Thank you so much for watching. As always, if you'd like to see me expand on something from this video, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you enjoy what you watch, leave a comment. Until next time, fellow alchemists, take care.